Today we are proudly announcing, for the first time in the history of Halo, half XP weekends. Fuck you, go outside, do something else. E3 has always been a cherished tradition for me. Back in middle and high school, that first week or two of summer vacation was always rung in with the E3 festivities, and in more recent years with the channel, it's evolved into enjoying the show with some Chick-fil-A, taking some notes, and uploading some analysis videos. Is E3 corny, cheesy, outdated? 100%, but for me, its absence last year was very strongly felt, especially in a year where new consoles made their debut. But now it's back, with the exception of Sony, who are once again abstaining. They have been engaging in some very weird antisocial behavior these past few years, like that 2018 conference where they did some Ouya-style guerrilla warfare and shuffled people through a tent down the street. Anyway, in prior years, I would immediately cover each conference in an individual video. That proved fun, but tiresome, so this time I gave myself some breathing and thinking room and put them all into one video. I won't be covering every single game shown off, I'm only going in-depth on the stuff I actually care about or am interested in. And for those who are unfamiliar with me, although I primarily play on PC these days, as in, if the game is available on PC, that's where I play it, with few exceptions, I own a Nintendo Switch, I have a PS5, and although I haven't played on an Xbox since 2015 due to Microsoft's PC support, the original Xbox was what really got me into games in the first place. All this is to say that while I of course have my preferences, I'm a multi-platform player, and I don't have some kind of blood oath allegiance to one of these boxes because it's the only way I can play games. So things were kicked off with Geoff Keighley's Summer Games event. Now Geoff Keighley is clearly an enthusiast, and someone who wants to do something positive for the industry. Obviously, I don't know him personally, but based on the relationships he has with cherished industry figures like Kojima and Gabe Newell, I think it's safe to say that his intentions are good. That being said, his last few events have been historically, legendarily some might say, lackluster in terms of world premieres, and I hate to start off negative, but this mostly continued that trend. We've got like Back 4 Blood, some Among Us shit, Jurassic World 2, and Death Stranding Director's Cut, which did at least have a fun trailer. All that stuff is whatever, I don't care, so let's just talk about the one redeeming thing, the re-emergence of Elden Ring. From Software's output in the last console generation was immense. Sekiro, Dark Souls 3, and Bloodborne, which I would say is my favorite game of the generation. They have their own style, and I don't think anyone else has been able to replicate it to the same effect. It's the best non-shooting 3D action game combat paired with like grandmaster level design and really strong artistic vision. People love to talk about how hard these games are to the point of it being a joke, but I don't see these games as hard. I see them as tapping into that old school video game feel, and they do it without being a 2D retro throwback or outright arcade style, which is usually what you have to play these days to get that fix. So what do I think of this? I think it looks like a From Software game. This is a return to the Demon's Dark Souls style of fantasy, but it seems a bit brighter, and I don't know why, but I get the impression that the story will be less obtuse, and more like what they did in Sekiro, where we hear a lot more dialogue. Despite the trailer being 4K 60, which is uncharacteristic of them, this is a cross-gen game, with next-gen support likely being as simple as that resolution and frame rate bump, and it's obviously still using the Bloodborne engine. I could definitely complain about it looking a little rough by 2021 standards, and I will. The textures are not amazing, they look flat, low res, and 4K is revealing that, and geometric detail is lacking, I would say. But I feel like all of that is a moot point. We already know that this engine works extremely well with their style of combat, and based on the rate at which they've been releasing games, they're very comfortable with it, and if they wanted to do an overhaul or switch to or develop a new engine, we wouldn't be seeing Elden Ring for a long time, so I'm willing to give them a slight pass on this. In terms of gameplay, I was a little concerned by the trailer. We see these big open areas traversed by a mount and a lot of bosses. It reminded me of Shadow of the Colossus, like a boss rush thing, which is not what I want. I'm more into the dungeon crawling and exploration, and then having that lead into boss fights. Miyazaki did some interviews and explained the structure of the game as being 6 major areas, each with its own dungeon and big boss, and while there is an intended order to them, you can do it in whatever order you want. Additionally, there are a wide variety of catacombs and castles and fortresses which are interspersed throughout the map. That sounds great to me, and as the IGN writer remarked, it sounds a lot like Breath of the Wild's structure, and while open world is a bit of a dirty word for me, I do trust the team at FromSoft to make one that veers in the direction of Zelda as opposed to Ubisoft. Then the whole George R.R. Martin thing. Personally, I couldn't care less. Miyazaki and his in-house team have proven themselves more than capable of creating captivating worlds and writing compelling lore for them, but admittedly, it will be interesting to see what a collaboration with a famous Western writer will bring to the flavor of the game. We've got to the point with these FromSoft games where they've built up such a massive back catalog that I'm completely satisfied and happy to see them do something more risky, even if I don't end up liking it. Ubisoft presentations are always a snooze fest, and if you're new to the channel, you should know that I have a strong distaste for their games and blame them for a lot of the bland and generic AAA open world stuff we saw last gen. Some people flag EA as the worst publisher, for me it's these guys. That's why this year I made the radical move of not even watching the event, and it seems like that paid off, because right after I got done not watching it, I saw tweets and reaction videos about how boring it was, how bad it was, and to those people I say, what did you expect? So, Far Cry 6, it's a cross-gen game. You'd assume they want to put the best foot forward, so it's probably PC or next-gen console footage, yet it still looks like this. And the casting of Giancarlo Esposito is a great villain pick, but I'm sure the game is fundamentally the same shit as Far Cry 5, which was the same shit as Far Cry 4, which was the same shit as Far Cry 3. I did a review of 5 where I talked about how this series desperately needs to start bringing back some of the simulator aspects that 2 had, and now with next-gen consoles having Zen 2 cores, I'm sure that's possible, but it's certainly not happening this time around. So what else did they show? Well, not much of interest. Fucking Watch Dogs and AC Valhalla DLC, yuck. There's another Mario Rabbids game for some reason, and then the Rainbow Six spin-off was finally shown after being announced 2 years ago. I might actually check that last one out because I really like Siege. It's one of the few things Ubisoft has done right in the last 6-7 years, and I think it's the most modern and innovative esports shooter in the mainstream. That said, this looks like Left 4 Dead Rainbow Six Remix with, as you'd expect, lots of reused assets, characters, and animations from Siege. So I'm not exactly chomping at the bit to get a taste. It feels like they could have done something more faithful to the property and frankly more original, like a whole game of that house-breaching mission from Modern Warfare 2019. The big surprise announcement of the show was the reveal of their Avatar game, as in the CGI-laden film, not the cartoon. I'll be honest with you, I do not give a shit about this franchise. I'm the last holdout known to man that has not seen the movie, but I do find the articles that pop up every few months about the 50-part Avatar sequel/revival plan to be at least fascinating. You guys have seen this, right? Like, they announced the next decade of Avatar films, despite there only being one movie from 2009, and they talked about how all the movies are already written, and the 4th movie already has parts filmed, even though they also said that 4 and 5 will only come out if 2 and 3 are successful. It's comically aggressive, and to me, utterly bizarre because it's been so long. They've just been largely leaving this property on the table for so long, and I don't think the iron's hot anymore, but I'm sure Fox, now Disney, will do everything in their power to astroturf it to success. It's hard to know what to expect from the game based on the trailer, but it appears to be first-person, which seems interesting, but the last first-person Ubisoft game with bows and arrows and prehistoric animals was Far Cry Primal, which is like an experimental form of digital torture, so, I would assume this will stick to the Far Cry 3 Assassin's Creed open world structure, aka big boring map littered with dots that take between 1 to 5 minutes per piece with main missions that shuffle you around the same areas. That's what Ubisoft is known for, but beyond that, I don't really know what direction they plan on taking this in. Clearly there's going to be combat, but I think it needs to be balanced out with some Mirror's Edge style platforming, maybe lean on the visuals, because according to the trailer, this is a next-gen only title, which is good to see. It's coming next year, which makes sense based on how long it's been in development, but it still seems like a bit of a surprise. Microsoft had a lot to prove this year. We all know the story. Last gen was a bloodbath for them. They got off to a horrible start with the TV, Xbox Play Hobbit shit. We saw the cancellation of exclusives like Scalebound and Phantom Dust Remake. Halo MCC, which should have been a killer app, did not work. I would know, I was trying to play it when it happened. And Crackdown 3 was wheeled out like 500 times, and when it did finally come out, it was shit. Just look at the difference in sales between generations. It's honestly staggering. Now, Phil Spencer took over the reins shortly after the launch of Xbox One and started refocusing the strategy. But that takes time. You have to come up with a strategy, get everyone on board internally, you have to buy these studios, figure out what you want them doing, and then wait years for it to be made. That's understandable, but what you're left with then is a beleaguered platform. When it comes down to it, Xbox One did not have a single seminal game. I like the Forza Horizon games, I enjoyed Quantum Break and Sunset Overdrive, and the Coalition have been great stewards of the Gears franchise, but there isn't a Bloodborne, a God of War, or even a game with a multiplayer component as revolutionary and enduring as Halo 3 or the original Gears trilogy was. It feels like it's been years of this messaging from Phil, and this posturing with these studio acquisitions, and now with the next-gen consoles already out, we need to see them make a case for Xbox beyond Games Pass and nice hardware design. Now, the surprise acquisition of Bethesda last year meant that they were also folded into this presentation, and while that purchase was no doubt a big deal, Bethesda have been, I would say, in a rough patch for the last few years. id Software have been putting out bangers, and while I didn't like the new Colossus, both it and Youngblood by Machine Games were relatively well received. Outside of that, though, BGS put out Fallout 76 in 2018. Hopefully I don't need to explain that. Rage 2 was, and Arcane and Tango's new games are timed exclusives for PS5. With so many of these studios already being accounted for or just coming off of recently released projects, that doesn't realistically leave a lot of room for surprises. They decided to open with Todd Howard, which was a bit frightening, if I'm honest, and he showed Starfield. Well, really an in-engine trailer that doesn't show us much. Starfield has been rumored for an insanely long time, and the main pitch I always heard was Star Trek Deep Space Nine RPG. I saw this trailer and I wasn't seeing that at all. It seemed much more like No Man's Sky, and the setting is like early space exploration, more Star Trek Enterprise. This is why I'm glad I waited a bit to do this video, because based on the interviews that Todd did, this trailer is completely useless and does a disservice to what the game actually is. He describes the setting as NASA punk. There's multiple alien races, there's cities, and he says to expect a more hardcore RPG experience. That sounds 1,000 times better than the humans-only exploration of empty planets that the trailer implies, and having that grounded aesthetic paired with aliens and cities and maybe even alien cities sounds good as fuck to me. And there's even more good news. As it says in the trailer, this is Creation Engine 2, who knows what that really means, but thank fucking God. And the game is next-gen only, Xbox console exclusive, which is a surprise to some people, not sure why. Regardless, that's a big exclusive to have, and it's going to be the biggest system seller Xbox has had since maybe the Bungie Halo games, because you better bet there's a lot of PlayStation owners that will want to play the next big BGS game. Is this trailer representative of real visuals? Usually I'd say no, not even close, but if you look at the face at the end, that's pretty rough, and the bar is set so low with 4 and 76 that just by nature of it being next-gen only, it should be a vast improvement. Now, being Xbox only will hopefully streamline development for them. It's one less thing to worry about, and they've been taking so long to make this. Presumably a lot of time was spent on the tech and getting a good grip on how to work with it after being so used to the old setup. They're saying November 11th, 2022 release date. That's extremely specific, and also the same day as Skyrim, so I do imagine that will happen. I was really excited for Starfield when I first heard about it, 6 years ago now, but as time has gone on, I've completely lost faith in BGS, and I think a lot of others have as well, so they're going to have to earn our trust back, but I think they know that they need to get this right after Fallout 4, and especially 76. Stalker 2 was the best thing shown at this event, and I would say that for me, it was the best thing at E3. Now, I have limited experience with the old Stalker games. They're a bit janky and never really worked that well for me, X-Ray Engine and all, but I do love the Tarkovsky film and the book Roadside Picnic, which is the source material for the film, and both of those were inspirations for the games. This new Stalker game is anything but janky. Holy shit does this game look good. The character models are absurd. I'm just going to put this one guy on screen for a little bit. Look at his hair.
Жизнь. Новую жизнь. Жизнь, которую я готов вернуть, если потребуется. Я буду защищать ее. Всегда.
That is the best looking hair I've ever seen in a game. Nothing comes even close. There's no dithering, it moves naturally, you can see some of the frizzy strands poking out. God damn, it looks good. And it's not just that. The atmosphere, the dialogue, the voice acting, the animations, especially the facial animations, it is all falling into place, and I'm not seeing anything that sticks out as being a weak point. If you don't know the Stalker games, the premise here is that after the Chernobyl meltdown, scientists went in and started doing experiments, which led to a second disaster, causing even more severe mutations and all other manner of physics-defying anomalies. Stalkers are operators that go into that area, known as the Zone, trying to collect artifacts for a profit, and of course, they run into all kinds of fucked up shit in the process. There's also a few factions, each with their own philosophical disagreements, and the Zone itself takes on this role of almost religious significance. My biggest question after watching this trailer was, is it fake? Because it looks that good. They put out the PC requirements, and the recommended GPU is a 1080 Ti, and that will get you 1080p 60, with not even max settings, because this certainly has ray tracing. So based on that, and the fact that it's UE4, I think this could end up looking that good, but it'll take a lot of hardware to do it. This is probably my most anticipated game now, even ahead of Elden Ring, and while I don't do as many game reviews these days, this is something that I might review. Despite EA having their own event on the 22nd, Battlefield 2042 got a gameplay reveal. This is basically Battlefield 4, but zany and less grounded, which is probably what people want. Instead of Levolutions, you get these Hollywood-style geostorms, and the maps seem big and open, with an emphasis on vehicle combat. The big news with 2042 is that it's multiplayer only, no campaign. Now this is going to be a bit hypocritical, because I said in my review of 5 that they should just bite the bullet and ditch the story like Treyarch did with Black Ops 4, because, well, the war stories in 5 were very bad. So I don't care that there's no campaign per se, but I've come to realize that not having a single player component is traditionally a bad sign, both of intention and effort. Because in an ideal world, cutting that shit would result in more work being poured into other areas of the game, but look at Battlefront 1. The details that have been divulged give me the impression of something that sounds more like a game as a service that was forced into a $60 retail package. There's some kind of specialist system with battle passes and new specialists being added. Ugh, I just can't get too excited for that, especially with how BF5's season passless model went, where the game tanked at launch and then ended up with much less post-launch content than BF1, because they didn't have that commitment that the traditional season pass brings. Now, I think 2042 will almost certainly be better than BF5, but I'm not getting too excited for this. Okay, so here it is. Halo. Oh man, oh man. I feel like I have to explain myself before I even talk about this, so bear with me. I've been playing Halo since Combat Evolved on the original Xbox, and no, I'm not a boomer, I was playing that shit at single-digit ages. I love all of the Bungie Halo games, even Reach, which I had issues with when it came out. Each of those games was slightly different and had its own flavor, enough to differentiate them in your head, while still remaining coherent and being in their own space, separated from what the other big shooters were doing at the time. These games had an extremely distinct feel, something that I can't quite articulate, but ever since Bungie left Microsoft and 343 took over the franchise, it's a feeling that they've never been able to replicate. To be clear, I'm not some nostalgic idiot. I don't think 343 should just make the same games Bungie made again, because 1, that's redundant, and 2, while I think they're still playable and have held up well, if you put out a game with those exact mechanics today, completely unchanged, it would not be well received by normal people. And that's why I feel bad when I bitch about 343 Halo, because when you critique something from a long-running franchise, you presumably have your own version of how it should be, what you would do if you were in charge, and I don't have that for Halo. I can say what I don't like, but I couldn't tell you what I would do. I think it's pretty agreed upon that Halo 5's single-player component was not good, but the problems I have with it and 4 are the same. They dug way deep in with the extended lore and made stories that were more concerned about connecting with books and other side content than they were with telling a good, self-contained story. All while feeling like they're taking place in a disconnected alternate universe from the Bungie games. And then multiplayer. Halo 4's sucked, just outright if you ask me, but 5, setting aside the Warzone, loot pack, BS mode, just the basic bitch Team Slayer stuff, is, mechanically, I think, quite good. It came at a time when advanced mobility was all the rage, again following the pack rather than doing its own thing, but it was one of the better implementations of that, and all the other contentious design choices played and flowed well. But it wasn't what most Halo fans were looking for, and it certainly did not bring Halo back into the spotlight. Halo's prominence, barring the MCC, has waned to the point of non-existence since Halo 5 dropped, and as a result, there was a lot riding on Infinite, both for Halo and Xbox. Then they showed the game last year, and it was looking not good, is a nice way of saying it, and after a few days, a year-long delay was announced. People were mostly complaining about the graphics, but if you ask me, there was a lot more bad about it than just the lighting and monkey. We saw these new whacked-out weapons that look like Halo 5, we saw the structure of the game, which is this big map with dots on it, go here to secure a tower, Ubisoft style, and then we got a taste of the story, which fell into the same trap that 4 and 5 did. When they first announced this game, the name, the art style, and the messaging from 343 made it seem like it would be a soft reboot, sort of an acknowledgement that the direction they were heading in was wrong. But looking at that gameplay reveal, I saw a lot of Halo 5 DNA. The same kind of weapon design, the same kind of sound design, sprint, and now a grappling hook. The things that were supposed to be callbacks felt like the most cynical form of nostalgia. Oh look, it's just like landing on Halo for the first time in CE, but now it's an Ubisoft map. Remember Kamikaze Grunts? They fly now, LOL. But really, the worst part and the main issue was that it just looked extremely boring. And then the story. Same thing as 4 and 5. Here we are with the Banished, a Halo Wars 2 thing, and there's an angry monkey screaming at me. I don't know who he is, it doesn't mean anything to me, and I'm not invested. Bungie Halo narratives had depth and lore that you could dig into, but what happened on screen? It was basic as fuck, anyone could follow along, and you didn't have to consult a wiki page to understand who the characters were. That's a long rant, so let's talk about this new footage. In terms of campaign, they just showed some cutscene shit, and visually it looks fine, except for that fake Cortana. But it's still the same tone, and I don't think that tone works. It's just more bog standard by the numbers stuff, feeling bad about Cortana for the 500th time, and it's always framed as if we should be in awe of the Master Chief even being on screen, even though he never really left. We also got a first look at multiplayer, and again, I'm seeing a lot of Halo 5 DNA. Sprint is back, but it seems much slower, to the point where it should maybe just not be there. Smart Link ADS is back. Advanced mobility is gone, but now we've got the grappling hook, which is visually goofy and very out of place. And you know what? It's probably fun. Like I said, I liked Halo 5, and this looks like a slowed down, more refined version of that, but is this the glorious return to Halo being a dominant force? I'm not seeing it, and I'm not sure why people are losing their minds about it. Visually, the multiplayer looks miles better than the single-player gameplay we saw last year, and while the art style is more in the direction of Halo 3, there's still some ugly armor, and I don't like the Roblox-ass vehicles, and some of the weapons, again, they look very Halo 5. They're brand new weapons, but contrasting them with the Halo 3-ish stuff is a confused look. On a more positive note, the maps look more traditional Halo-sized. I saw one that looks like Turf from Halo 2, and Valhalla from 3 was featured prominently. The big news about multiplayer was that it's free to play. Ugh. So that means battle passes with skins and all that, but honestly, that's already what they were doing with 5, just with card packs, so whatever. But it's not something you'll ever see me cheer on. I really don't know what more to say about Halo. I read the Waypoint articles they put up for this game, and I get the impression that they're almost putting too much thought into everything, getting hung up on the details. And Bungie, especially at the start of Halo, was very much an organic thing with a totally different culture than 343, and even with Joe Staten back on board, that original run of games, maybe it was just a lightning in the bottle moment. That's kind of where my head's been at in regards to Halo after playing through the MCC on PC. The last two big things were both surprises: Forza Horizon 5 and a new Arcane game called Redfall. Now, Forza Horizon 5 is not surprising because I didn't think they would make one, but because Playground is supposed to be making Fable, so I guess they have two big teams, and it's coming out in November. I know a lot of people roll their eyes when car games show up at these events, but I love me some Forza Horizon, and while this is a cross-gen game, the footage shown, presumably on Series X, looks stunning and absolutely next-gen. The setting this time is Mexico, great choice, and yeah, it's Forza Horizon. Very consistently good games. I just hope they get the engine and exhaust sounds right this time around, because that's been a consistent complaint of mine. Arcane's game is much less interesting, if you ask me. So first off, two games at the same time from Arcane. They actually have two studios, one in France, the other in Texas, of all places. They showed a super long pre-rendered cinematic trailer that implies some kind of co-op thing, which this show had a lot of, and it's some kind of stylized vampire Left 4 Dead thing. I'm not a big fan of this, but a surprise announcement nonetheless. So that was all the big stuff, but they went nuts with smaller announcements. One of the Playdead co-founders, so the guys that made Limbo and Inside, left Playdead and is making a new game called Somerville. It's about some kind of alien invasion, and it looks a hell of a lot like Inside visually, so I'm down. That was one of the best indie games I've played. There was another great-looking indie game called Replaced. It's got a cyberpunk look with what I would call retro graphics mixed with modern techniques. Super cool stuff. What else? There's a new Plague Tale game. I've been meaning to play the first one. It looks really nice. Wasn't expecting a second one, but here it is, and it's next-gen only. We saw Diablo 2 Remastered, looking nice. Avalanche has a new game called Contraband. No gameplay, just a teaser, some kind of co-op game, and Obsidian is in the early stages of development on Outer Worlds 2. Kind of a shame they're doing that and not a Fallout game, because it's going to be so long before Bethesda gets around to doing that again. By the standards of Microsoft, this was a great show. Clearly, lots of content, and some high-quality content at that, which this console sorely needed. One of the takeaways I had was that a lot of these games are next-gen only, which is surprising. Microsoft has been pushing cross-gen with their smart delivery, whereas Sony made that statement, "We believe in generations." That narrative seems to have been flipped. Now God of War, GT, and Horizon are all going to have PS4 versions, and Microsoft has a ton of next-gen only games, which is what I want to see. But I'm still not seeing that big new game that says, this is why I need an Xbox, to your average person. I guess that could be Starfield? But I still think this is the most prepared Xbox has been in years, maybe since the Xbox One launched, and there's promising games here with aggressive release dates that are way sooner than I anticipated. Like Forza Horizon 5, November, out of nowhere. And of course, almost all of these games, if not all of them, are on Games Pass, which is an X factor that Sony simply does not have an answer to. Oh my goodness, Square Enix. So they opened with their Guardians of the Galaxy game, which was circulating in the rumor mill prior to E3. This was their big thing to show off, and they were so proud of it that they showed it for what felt like an hour. And, it's a video game, that's for sure. It looks all shitty and off-brand, just like the Avengers game, and I'm sure there's going to be someone that tells me, oh, it's more comic-based, oh, it's its own thing. And yes, the designs are comic-based, but then why does the dialogue try to be exactly like the movie? The music, it's exactly like the movie. You can't have it both ways, and it's not like Guardians was a headliner comic book. Making that first film was a huge gamble, and it happened to pay off. Now, unlike the Avengers game, this is purely a single-player experience, but my thoughts on it are the same. If you're going to make Marvel games, they need to be fully MCU, preferably in continuity, not this weird part comic-based, part MCU ripoff. And for the love of God, spend some damn money on the thing, because this kind of stuff is just not going to cut it. Of course, doing a proper MCU game would be expensive, but Disney has the money, and a game like that would undoubtedly sell like crazy. And if they did real MCU games, I don't think we necessarily need to be playing as main characters from the movies portrayed by expensive actors. Here's an example: instead of a Guardians game, make a Ravagers game and have it be a first-person shooter, sort of like Star Wars Republic Commando. I don't know anything other than this, because this just doesn't look good at all. Platinum Games are working on some new hack-and-slash thing, but it has an emphasis on co-op, and it's a game as a service. Vomit in my mouth. Then they rounded off this amazing show with a new Final Fantasy game, Stranger of Paradise. You may have seen my video on this, I apologize for that, Chaos made me do it, but jokes aside, this looks really bad. It's honestly amazing. So this is a Team Ninja game. There's a PS5 demo that came out, it was corrupted on day one, but now it works, and the people that played it described it as basically a Nioh reskin, and some even say they liked it, but man, holy shit, why does it look like a PS3 game? So this was a bad showing from Square Enix. No Final Fantasy XVI, no 7 Remake news, they probably shouldn't have even done a show. If this was in a traditional on-stage format, I think it would have been Konami tier, like legendarily bad. PC gaming show. Moving on. Capcom announced that they're just starting to make RE Village DLC. This is interesting because 7 was very aggressive with DLC. They had a whole suite of it, so I'm not sure why it took popular demand for it to happen with Village. But that means we probably won't see it until maybe the end of the year or even later. And that was it. That was the Capcom show. Nintendo have been doing phenomenally well lately. They just keep consistently selling Switches like hotcakes. It feels like everyone has one, and it's not hard to see why. It has a compelling catalog of games, and you have the option of either a $300 system that can play on a TV, or pay only $200 and lose that functionality, but gain what I think is a dramatically improved handheld experience with Switch Lite. For what you're getting access to, that's dirt cheap. If you're a big Nintendo fan or the Switch is your only system, there's been a pretty consistent trickle of more low-key Nintendo games for you to play, like Luigi's Mansion, the Link's Awakening remake, Bowser's Fury, as well as a smattering of Wii U ports, but it's been a while since we got a big blowout Nintendo game. At least from my perspective, which might be a bit out of line as someone who isn't 100% focused on Nintendo all the time. In terms of big franchises, they spent a lot of ammo early on. Zelda, Mario Odyssey, and Splatoon 2 all within the first year of Switch. As someone who usually only turns on my Switch for games like that, what I wanted to see this year was updates on the big stuff they already announced, with release dates that are hopefully sooner rather than later, and maybe one or two fresh announcements, something like a new Mario Kart, because it's been a while. So how'd they do? Well, I would say I'm not as enthusiastic about their showing as everyone else seems to be, but I think they did alright. They opened with a new Smash character from Tekken, and while both of these things are pretty far removed from my area of expertise, I do enjoy seeing them add oddball characters to Smash like Minecraft Steve, and this is not that, at least to me. That said, he's been pretty well received, so I'll leave that judgment to people who actually play Smash. Then, the big surprise announcement, a new 2D side-scrolling Metroid game, Dread, and it comes out this fall. Okay, just out of thin air, here it is, and it's coming out next week. What the fuck? Metroid has been so neglected, so abused by Nintendo since what, like Prime 3, which was 2007? Dread's visual style could be more compelling, but whatever, who cares? This is really more about gameplay, and the last time I can remember Nintendo doing a back-to-basics 2D game for a big franchise like this that wasn't a remake is Zelda Link Between Worlds, and that was phenomenal. I think it's safe to say that Prime 4 has had, and maybe still has, some development issues, so this is like the perfect diversion from that. I can't wait to see what they've come up with, and just how cool is it, right? A big mainline 2D game 19 years after the last one. Then they tell us there's a new fucking WarioWare game. I can't imagine WarioWare is very popular, especially in the West, but here it is anyway, and it comes out in September. Sometimes that Nintendo stubbornness is a blessing. Since this is a controller-based game, they're going to lose some of the wacky stuff they were able to do with the Wiimote or the mic and touchscreen of the DS, and they are pushing the co-op aspect of it, which is certainly not how I plan on playing it, so I hope that's not an issue. If you've never played a WarioWare game before, I do recommend it. Maybe go check out the 3DS one. Super interesting little micro games, fun art styles. Basically, it's like a phone game from a parallel dimension where phone games are good. Actually, now that I say that, Nintendo, WarioWare phone game that's a one-time purchase, no MTX, get on it. Then Fatal Frame, Maiden of Black Water Remastered. I remember this originally being a Wii U game back in the day. I believe it was not available in the US, and I never got to play a Fatal Frame game myself, so I will be checking this out. Now this one is not just on Switch, it's on everything including PC, which is great. Finally, they ended off with sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. That's still the name they're using, and they say telling us the real one would ruin the story. So what did the trailer show us? Not much. It's like a minute long, we see Link in the sky, there's chunks of the world floating in the clouds. Doesn't give us much of an idea of the gameplay, and definitely no story at all, so I'll just tell you what I think of there being a sequel in general, because I haven't got the chance to talk about it on the channel yet. I would say Zelda is my favorite Nintendo franchise, and Breath of the Wild, I loved it, everyone else loves it, it's probably the best take on open world game design ever, and for some reason, when I played that game, I got this incredibly strong RPG immersion factor from it. Couldn't exactly tell you why, but I can say that the world, the art style, and the atmosphere just feel right. So making a sequel is a no-brainer, but this doesn't really happen with Zelda, sticking with the same engine, the same world, and the same style for 2 games in a row. The only other example of that is really Majora's Mask, and that's less of a sequel and more of a fever dream. What I'd like to see in the sequel is more of an emphasis on story, maybe a slightly smaller but more densely packed map, and dungeons. Lots of dungeons. My biggest issue with Breath of the Wild was the lack of big dungeons. I think the Divine Beasts were supposed to be stand-ins for traditional dungeons, but they were too small and easy. The castle is really the only dungeon, and it was amazing, so I hope we get a lot more of that in this new game. 2022 release date? Can't imagine it being a disappointment. Overall, a decent show from Nintendo, 3 nice surprises, but I'm kind of let down by what we didn't see. Bayonetta 3, is it still happening? Splatoon 3, no new info, no new Mario Kart. Please, for the love of God, Nintendo, don't go a full generation without a new Mario Kart. That would be crushing. And no Switch Pro, to the dismay of many, but despite the constant news stories about it, I wasn't expecting it at this direct, but that doesn't mean I don't want it. The reality of the hardware is always a bit of a buzzkill for me with these Switch games, not because I want to see Splatoon 3 with Naughty Dog level rendering, but just because 1080p on a 4K TV is not fun. Of course, we still don't know what form Switch Pro will even take. It could just be an upgraded screen and nothing else. But there are rumors about DLSS for dock mode, and I hope and pray that we get something that can do higher than 1080p in dock mode, because that's all I want. These are simple looking games. All they need is a resolution bump and they'll look great on a 4K TV. Give me that and I'll be beyond happy, #1 Nintendo fan. This was overall not the best E3. All the presentations outside of Xbox and Nintendo were pretty fucking dreadful, at least what I watched. I heard the Devolver one was okay, but Sony's absence once again is not helping things. However, this is the first Xbox event I've seen where it's more than just posturing. We're finally seeing that Phil Spencer course correction materialize into high-quality games that will only be playable on an Xbox console, with some coming in the next year or so. Did we get any bombshell, shocking announcements? You know, not really. I guess Starfield being 100% Xbox exclusive is that for some. That was never a question for me, so I wasn't surprised. But I think everyone, myself included even, still hasn't processed just how big of a deal that is. Because it's not just that one game. It's Elder Scrolls 6, it's the next Doom game if they make one, and any other taken-for-granted multi-plat franchises that came with that Bethesda acquisition. In the case of Starfield, did they just buy up something already well into development that would have been on PlayStation otherwise? Yeah, they did. And that's frustrating to a lot of people, but what are you gonna do? It'll probably be a while before we see something come out of that acquisition that might not have happened otherwise. For example, Obsidian making another Fallout game, or a New Vegas remake. Xbox is now going to have a pretty consistent trickle of cool games for Games Pass subscribers, but it seems like their only big game this holiday is Halo, and I just don't see that as being this crazy system seller that sets the world on fire, but time will tell. I don't think we saw anything this time around that is enough to flip the tides against PlayStation. While it's made fun of for having no games, PS5 has 3 big games that can only be played on it right now. Demon's Souls, Returnal, and now Ratchet & Clank. Some will argue that those games are remakes or whatever, but the reality is that that's more than Xbox Series has, which currently is 0. What does change things is this whole cross-gen fiasco. I was not a fan of Microsoft's cross-gen approach, but now Horizon 2, God of War, and Gran Turismo are now all apparently getting PS4 versions, and I'm not a fan of that either. The game engines are now more scalable, especially for Microsoft Studios where they're making a PC version anyway, but I still find this to be a disappointment all around. Graphics can scale massively, but there are certain key game design choices that are not possible when your game has to filter down to the lowest common denominator. Forza Horizon 5, great example. It looks amazing, but its gameplay systems are inherently shackled to Xbox One. The last-gen CPUs suck, and they can only leverage the SSD for load times, not gameplay. I've been playing Ratchet & Clank on PS5, and that game's entire gimmick is designed around the ability to stream in assets instantaneously with the SSD. It would not be possible on PS4. Nintendo did cap off the show nicely, and Metroid was an amazing surprise, but it would have been nice if they had another big game, frankly something with more broad appeal like Mario Kart or an Odyssey 2 for the holiday. But based on hardware sales, they don't really need any help selling Switches. And who knows, maybe there was a Switch Pro in some big game, but it got pushed back due to the semiconductor shortage and other COVID-related setbacks. Breath of the Wild 2 is great, but they say 2022, and based on how little was shown, that's probably later than sooner. Honestly, the whole E3 outside of Metroid did not give us any earth-shattering revelations, but there's certainly some cool stuff here to look forward to, and Xbox is finally getting more serious. Let me know what you liked from E3 this year. Likes and subscriptions are appreciated if you enjoyed this behemoth of a video. And until next time, thanks for watching.